Okay, so ready for a deep dive into Receta de Mama? Even the notebook itself is a bit of a time capsule, isn't it? Ian or I blocked a notice, 100 pages, that faded blue cover.
Yeah, you don't see those much anymore.
Not like this, and the ink, it's all
Kind of hazy.
exactly like it's seen some things in its day, and you can practically smell the olive oil and onions, can't you?
It's incredible how evocative just holding something like this can be, right? Those little stains on the pages, those aren't just stains. They're practically a timeline of meals past. This wasn't some pristine cookbook. This was use AD.
Someone was cooking up memories in there, and not just anyone. Recetas de Mama. I mean, that just gets you right in the heart, doesn't it? It suggests this whole lineage of cooking, these family secrets passed down. You just don't get that from a downloaded recipe.
You really don't. This is culinary inheritance. Someone, probably generations back, thought these recipes were special enough to write down, and then someone else cherished them enough to keep them, add their own notes, continue that tradition.
Okay, enough about the feels. Let's get to the food. What kind of culinary adventures are we talking about here? Give us a taste of what Mama was cooking.
Well, get ready for a feast. We've got soups, of course, to start. Sopa de pescado, sopa de pueros canaros. Those alone tell me Mama knew how to comfort the soul.
But it wasn't all about cozy nights in, right? There are some seriously hearty main courses in here.
Oh, absolutely. Macarones con tomate. I bet that was a staple. Plus pollo guisado, even cordero guisado. Those are some serious stews, perfect for a crowd.
And if you thought Mama didn't do dessert, think again. Bizcocho de yogurt, tarte de queso. She clearly knew the importance of ending a meal on a sweet note.
It's the range that gets me, you know? It's not just one style of cooking. We're focused on one particular ingredient. This collection speaks to a cook who was adaptable, ready to whip up whatever the occasion called for.
It's like a culinary roadmap of Mama's life, in a way, right? Reflecting different times, maybe even different places, through the dishes she chose to preserve.
Exactly. And speaking of preservation, we should talk about the recipes themselves. They're not what you'd find in a modern cookbook, with the precise measurements, step-by-step instructions. There's a lot of un poco and bastante, sprinkled throughout terms that rely more on intuition and experience than exact science.
It's like those cooking shows where they say, and a pinch of love. Except here, it's a pinch of Mama's wisdom baked into every instruction.
And that, I think, is what makes this collection so fascinating. It's not just a list of ingredients, it's a glimpse into a way of life, a time when cooking was more about feeling your way through a recipe than rigidly following instructions.
Okay, so we've established this is no ordinary recipe book, but there are a few dishes that jumped out at us, recipes with a little extra intrigue. What were some of the standouts for you?
Well, for starters, the sopa de pescado, the fish soup, it's anything but ordinary. Most recipes call for poaching the fish gently, but Mama blends everything together except the fish, creating this thick, almost stew-like base.
That's so interesting. It speaks to a certain level of creativity in the kitchen, wouldn't you say? A willingness to experiment, maybe even break the rules a little bit.
Totally. Makes you wonder, where did that technique come from? Family secret? Passed down. Something Mama dreamt up on her own.
It's like a culinary mystery waiting to be solved. And speaking of mysteries, the ensaladilla rusa, the Spanish potato salad, had a curious detail. Mama actually included instructions on how to decorate it.
Isn't that something? That little detail, to me, speaks volumes about Mama's approach to food. It wasn't just about sustenance, it was about presentation, making even a simple salad visually appealing.
Like she understood that food is meant to be enjoyed with all the senses, not just taste.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of enjoying with all the senses, there's a recipe in here that's not for the faint of heart. Caracoles.
Snails. In a home recipe collection. Now that's adventurous.
It certainly is. Suggests a bolder palate than your average home cook. Maybe even hints at regional influences. Snails are considered a delicacy in certain parts of Spain, so this could be a window into Mama's culinary roots.
It's amazing how a single ingredient can unlock so much history and intrigue. And speaking of intriguing ingredients, the recipe for patatas con chorizo, potatoes with chorizo, caught my eye, but for a different reason. Mama specifically calls for Storlux bouillon.
That's a fantastic detail. It's like finding a time capsule hidden within the pages. Storlux was a popular brand of bouillon in Spain, particularly in the mid-20th century.
So it's not just a recipe, it's a clue. We're practically culinary detectives here, piecing together Mama's life through these ingredients and techniques.
Exactly. And speaking of clues, the champignons al horno, the baked mushrooms, recipe calls for a Pyrex dish.
Now, that might not seem like much, but remember, We're talking about a handwritten recipe collection that's probably been passed down for generations.
It suggests that Mama was open to incorporating newer kitchen technologies into her cooking. She wasn't afraid of progress. It challenges our image of traditional cooks as being stuck in their ways, shows us that adaptation and innovation can coexist with time-honored techniques.
It's like she understood that cooking is a journey, not a destination, and there's always something new to learn and explore in the kitchen, no matter how many generations have come before you.
Exactly. And speaking of learning and exploring, we can't overlook those intriguing notes about the microwave. Seems Mama wasn't afraid to experiment with modern conveniences alongside her traditional techniques.
It's a reminder that tradition is not static. It evolves and adapts with each generation. But you know what else really struck me about these recipes?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
It's the way Mama approached measurements, or rather the lack thereof. Remember how many times we saw un poco or bastante instead of precise quantities? It's a far cry from the meticulously measured recipes we often see today.
That's such an important observation. It speaks to a different time, a different approach to cooking. This wasn't about achieving perfect replication. It was about intuition, experience, and trusting your senses in the kitchen.
It's like those moments when you call your grandma for a recipe and she says, oh, just add a handful of this and a pinch of that.
Exactly. It's that inherent understanding of flavor and texture that comes from years of practice, from growing up in the kitchen, from learning by feel rather than by the book.
And it makes me wonder about those moments in Mama's kitchen. The sights, the smells, the sounds that filled that space where she created these culinary masterpieces.
Can you imagine learning to cook alongside her?
Yeah.
Watching as she effortlessly tossed in a chorrito of this or a puñadito of that, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who's mastered their craft.
It paints such a vivid picture. And it makes me appreciate these recipes even more, knowing that they're infused with those intangible elements, the love, the tradition, a lifetime of culinary wisdom.
It's a reminder that food is more than just sustenance. It's a story, a memory connection to those who came before us.
And speaking of stories, there's one particular recipe that has me completely captivated, Mama's sopa de pescado. You mentioned earlier that it's unlike any other fish soup recipe you've encountered, with that intriguing step of blending everything but the fish. Let's unpack that one a little further, shall we? I'm dying to know what Mama's thinking was there. It's like she took a classic fish soup and said, hold my sangria, watch this.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Most fish soups aim for that delicate broth, but this one's all about hearty texture, deep flavor. It makes you wonder, maybe, just maybe, there's a practical reason behind this unconventional method.
Okay, I'll bite. What kind of practical reason could lead to, pureeing your soup base?
Think about traditional kitchens, especially in the past. Ingredients were precious. Nothing went to waste. Blending those vegetables, maybe using a few that were past their prime, it wouldn't just thicken the soup, it'd stretch those flavors further, make a little go a long way.
So not only is it delicious, it's resourceful. I can see Mama now making the most of what she had on hand. It speaks to a time when cooking wasn't just about following a recipe, it was about, using your ingenuity, making do. But let's get back to the recipe itself. How does this unconventional fish soup all come together?
Well, after that base is good and simmered, Mama instructs us to se saca la merluza. Basically, you do gently remove the cooked fish, keep it aside for the moment. Then comes the fun part. Y se bate todo lo demás. Everything else gets a whirl in the blender.
So we're talking silky, smooth, almost creamy soup base, infused with all those amazing flavors of the sea. I bet the aroma alone is enough to make your mouth water. But what about the fish? We can't forget about the star of the show.
You're absolutely right. Mama wouldn't let us down. Once the base is blended to perfection, it's time to bring back the fish. En una sartén se pone aceite con cebolla. A little olive oil, some chopped onions in a pan. Sound familiar?
It's the start of a sofrito, right? That cornerstone of Spanish cooking. Mama's not letting those flavor bombs go to waste either. She's building layer upon layer of deliciousness.
Precisely. And this is where the dish truly transforms. The sofrito adds this depth, this richness that elevates the entire soup. Then gently, you place that cooked fish on top of that creamy, flavorful base, drizzle it with the fragrant sofrito, and serve.
Just listening to you describe it, I can practically taste it. It's like a symphony of flavors and textures, the creamy soup, the delicate fish, the savory sofrito, all coming together in perfect harmony. But, as we're talking about Mama's cooking, it occurs to me that this sopa de pescado is more than just a recipe. It's almost a metaphor for her approach to life, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's about taking something familiar, a classic dish, a traditional technique, and adding your own twist, your own personal touch. It's about embracing both tradition and innovation, resourcefulness and creativity.
And it's about creating something truly special, something that nourishes not just the body, but the soul.
Beautifully put. And that, I think, is the essence of Mama's culinary legacy. It's about more than just following instructions. It's about infusing every dish with love, with history, with the spirit of generations past.
It makes you think about all the meals she must have prepared, using this notebook as her guide. The family gatherings, the holiday feasts, the simple weeknight dinners, each one a testament to her love for food and the people she shared it with.
It's a heartwarming thought, isn't it?
Mhm.
And it makes those handwritten notes even more precious, knowing they hold within them not just recipes, but memories, stories, a whole lot of love.
Speaking of stories, there's another recipe that caught my eye, one that speaks to a sense of adventure, maybe even a touch of homesickness. Remember the caracoles, the snails, not exactly your typical weeknight meal.
Ah, yes, the caracoles.
Ugh.
A dish that's as intriguing as it is delicious.
It speaks to a willingness to embrace different flavors, different textures, different culinary traditions. And as we mentioned earlier, it might even offer a clue to Mama's own background or the regions of Spain that influenced her cooking. It's like a little culinary mystery waiting to be unraveled. And while the recipe in this collection is sadly incomplete, the details we do have are incredibly evocative. Mama notes that the snails should be soaked overnight in agua fria, cold water, to purge them. Then they're simmered slowly with tocino y sal, bacon and salt. It's a simple preparation, but one that speaks to a deep understanding of flavor.
Absolutely. That slow simmering allows the flavors of the bacon and salt to penetrate the snails, creating this rich, savory broth. And while we don't have the complete recipe, it's not hard to imagine the aromas that must have filled Mama's kitchen as those caracoles simmered away on the stovetop.
It makes you wish you could go back in time, just for an afternoon, to experience her kitchen in all its glory, to see her hands at work, smell those incredible aromas, and taste the dishes that have captured our imaginations.
It's a reminder that food has this incredible power to transport us, to evoke memories, to connect us to people and places both familiar and unknown.
And speaking of connections, let's talk about another recipe that caught our eye, the patatas con chorizo. It wasn't just the dish itself, but a tiny detail that spoke volumes. Mama's insistence on using Storlux bouillon.
Ah, yes, the Storlux clue. It's these seemingly insignificant details that often reveal the most fascinating insights. As we discussed earlier, Storlux was a popular brand of bouillon in Spain, particularly in the mid-20th century. So this little note not only tells us about Mama's taste preferences, it helps us place her in a specific time and place.
It's like finding a hidden message from the past, a little wink from Mama saying, "Remember me, this is what my world was like." And it makes you wonder what other clues are hidden within these pages. What other stories are waiting to be told?
That's the beauty of exploring handwritten recipe collections like this. They're full of surprises, little glimpses into the lives and kitchens of those who came before us.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, one recipe, one handwritten note, one un poco of this and bastante of that at a time. But as fascinating as the individual recipes are, what really stands out to me is the overall impression they create this image of Mama as a resourceful, adaptable, and incredibly skilled cook.
I couldn't agree more. Take, for instance, her use of the microwave. Here we have a woman who clearly cherished tradition, who meticulously documented generations-old recipes in her trusty ENRI bloc de notas. Yet she wasn't afraid to embrace modern conveniences, to adapt and evolve her cooking methods to suit her needs.
It challenges our preconceived notions of what it means to be a traditional cook, doesn't it? It shows that tradition and innovation aren't mutually exclusive. They can coexist and even enhance one another.
Precisely. And it speaks to Mama's intelligence, her willingness to embrace new possibilities without abandoning the heart of her culinary heritage.
It's a powerful reminder that tradition is a living, breathing thing, constantly evolving and adapting with each generation. But there's another aspect of Mama's resourcefulness that we haven't touched on yet. Her ability to create culinary magic using the simplest, most readily available ingredients.
You're absolutely right. Look at the recurring themes throughout this collection. Onions, garlic, parsley, tomatoes, the staples of any Spanish kitchen. Mama didn't need fancy ingredients or exotic spices to create flavorful, satisfying meals. She understood the power of simplicity, of letting those humble ingredients shine.
It's a valuable lesson for us today in a world where we're constantly bombarded with new and exciting ingredients. Sometimes the most satisfying meals are those made with the things we often take for granted.
Absolutely. And it speaks to a time when people had a deeper connection to their food, when they understood the value of using what they had on hand and wasting nothing.
It's about appreciating the bounty of the earth, no matter how humble it may seem. And speaking of bounty, we can't forget about Mama's arroz a la cubana. It's more than just a rice dish. It's a window into the history of Spain, its relationship with its former colonies, and the fusion of cultures that have shaped its culinary landscape.
You're right. It's believed that this dish, with its intriguing combination of rice, tomatoes, eggs, and sometimes bananas, reflects the cultural exchange between Spain and Cuba, particularly during the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How a simple recipe can tell such a rich and complex story. And it makes you wonder, did Mama have a personal connection to Cuba? Was this dish a reminder of a place she'd been, or perhaps a taste of home for someone she loved?
It's a tantalizing question, and one that, unfortunately, we may never know the answer to. But that's part of the allure of these handwritten recipes, isn't it? They leave us wanting more, eager to unlock the secrets and stories hidden within their pages.
Absolutely. It's like we're on a culinary treasure hunt, and each recipe is a clue that brings us closer to understanding the woman behind this incredible collection. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the sweeter side of Mama's repertoire, wouldn't we? After all, no Spanish feast is complete without a delectable dessert.
You're absolutely right. From what I see here, Mama was as skilled a baker as she was a cook. Her bizcocho de yogurt, a classic Spanish yogurt cake, is a testament to her ability to create simple, flavorful treats using everyday ingredients. And her tarta de queso, her cheesecake, offers a glimpse into the evolving culinary landscape of Spain, incorporating international ingredients like Philadelphia cream cheese.
It's fascinating to see how Mama embraced those global influences without abandoning her culinary roots. It speaks to her adaptability, her willingness to experiment, and her desire to create something truly special for her loved ones. But as we're talking about her desserts, it occurs to me that there's something incredibly personal about the act of baking. It's like sharing a piece of your heart, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Baking is often seen as an act of love, a way to express care and affection for those we hold dear. And in Mama's case, I think her desserts were just another way for her to share her love for her family and friends.
It makes those bizcocho de yogurt and tarta de queso recipes even more special, knowing they were made with such care and intention.
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? And it speaks to the power of food to create connections, to evoke emotions, and to nourish us on a deeper level.
Now, we've talked a lot about the recipes themselves, but we can't forget about those incredible handwritten notes that bring this collection to life. Remember those little asides, the cooking times scribbled in the margins, the specific brands Mama insisted on using? It's like having her right there in the kitchen with us, guiding our every move.
Those notes are pure gold. They offer invaluable insights into Mama's thinking, her techniques, and her personal touch. Like her note on the sopa de puerros con arroz, the leek and rice soup, where she writes 25 grains más o menos de arroz, 25 grams more or less of rice.
That más o menos, that more or less, is so telling, isn't it? It speaks to a time when cooking wasn't about rigid precision, but about intuition, about feeling your way through a recipe, about trusting your senses.
Exactly. And it reinforces what we were discussing earlier about Mama's approach to measurements. It wasn't about achieving perfect replication. It was about understanding the essence of a dish and adapting it to your liking, to the ingredients you had on hand, to the moment.
It's a reminder that cooking is a dialogue, not a monologue. It's about engaging with your ingredients, with your tools, with your senses, and ultimately with the people you're cooking for.
Beautifully put. And speaking of engaging with our senses, let's delve into another one of Mama's handwritten gems,
Right.
her note on the cordero guisado, the lamb stew. Do you remember what she said about cooking the lamb?
I do. She specifically instructed us to cook the lamb in agua fina, clear water, until it's almost done, and then transfer it to a pan with sautéed onions and garlic.
It's a simple technique, but one that speaks to Mama's deep understanding of how to coax the best flavor out of her ingredients.
Okay, so walk us through it. Why cook the lamb in water first? Wouldn't that dilute the flavor?
Not at all. In
Eh?
fact, it's a brilliant way to ensure that the lamb is incredibly tender. By gently simmering it in water first, Mama's preventing it from drying out, allowing it to cook through evenly without losing its natural juices.
Ah, I see. So it's about building a foundation of flavor, ensuring that that lamb is tender and flavorful before it even hits the pan with those aromatic onions and garlic.
Precisely. And then, by transferring the lamb to the pan with the sautéed onions and garlic, she's creating this rich, flavorful sauce that will coat the meat perfectly, infusing it with even more savory goodness.
It's a masterclass in layering flavors, and it highlights another one of Mama's key culinary principles. Simplicity doesn't have to mean boring.
Absolutely. In fact, some of the most memorable dishes are those that rely on a handful of carefully chosen ingredients prepared with care and attention to detail.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true of Mama's cooking.
It makes you want to grab an apron, fire up the stove, and recreate every single one of these dishes, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think Mama would approve. After all, what better way to honor her legacy than by sharing her love for food with the world?
Beautifully said. Now, there's one more dish I want to talk about before we move on. Mama's pollo guisado, her chicken stew. It's a dish that exemplifies the heart and soul of Spanish home cooking, wouldn't you say? It really is. Pollo guisado. It's like a warm hug on a plate, you know? The
Yeah.
kind of dish that just makes you feel good no matter what kind of day you've had. What is it about Mama's version that makes it so special?
Well, like so many of her recipes, it starts with simple, readily available ingredients. She starts by browning pieces of chicken with onions and olive oil. Pretty standard approach.
But there's a twist, right? Something
Yeah.
about those onions.
You've got a good eye. She doesn't just leave those onions to soften in the pan. She carefully removes them after each batch of chicken, sets them aside, to be mashed later. It's a small step, but it makes a world of difference in terms of flavor and texture.
So she's creating a separate onion puree. I bet that adds a silky smoothness to the finished stew.
Exactly. It's like she instinctively understood how to layer those flavors, building complexity with every step. But here's the real kicker. After browning the chicken, Mama instructs us to fry slices of bread in the same oil.
Fried bread in a stew. That's a new one on me. What was she thinking?
It's brilliant, actually, and again, a testament to that spirit of resourcefulness. By frying the bread, she's not only adding this subtle richness to the stew, but she's also creating a natural thickener. Remember, this is a woman who knew how to stretch her ingredients, make a little go a long way.
Waste not, want not. Mama clearly lived by those words in her kitchen. But let's not forget about that chicken. It's been simmering away this whole time, soaking up all those incredible flavors.
You're right. And now it's time for the grand finale. Mama instructs us to mash the fried bread with those reserved cooked onions, creating this thick, flavorful paste. Then that glorious mixture is added to the pot with the chicken, along with some water, a touch more olive oil, and left to simmer until the chicken is fall-apart tender.
It sounds like a symphony of flavors and textures, all coming together in perfect harmony. But there's one last detail, isn't there? Something about pine nuts.
Ah, yes, the crowning touch. Once the stew has reached peak perfection, Mama sprinkles a few roasted pine nuts over the top. It's a small addition, but it adds this delightful crunch, a hint of nutty sweetness that just elevates the entire dish.
It's those little touches, those thoughtful details that really set Mama's cooking apart, don't they? She understood that food is meant to be enjoyed with all the senses, and she wasn't afraid to add a touch of elegance, even to a humble chicken stew.
Absolutely. And speaking of elegance, let's not forget about Mama's desserts. Her bizcocho de yogurt, that classic Spanish yogurt cake. It's a study in simplicity and flavor.
It's the kind of cake that brings back memories, isn't it? The aroma of it baking in the oven, the way it melts in your mouth with every bite. Pure comfort food.
And it's made with ingredients you probably have in your pantry right now.
Yeah.
Yogurt, eggs, sugar, flour, a touch of olive oil. Mama's recipes remind us that you don't need fancy ingredients or elaborate techniques to create something truly special.
It's about understanding the fundamentals, using what you have, and infusing every dish with that love, that care.
And speaking of love and care, check out Mama's recipe for tarta de queso, her cheesecake. It's a classic dessert, but with a twist. Instead of using a traditional Spanish cheese, Mama calls for queso Philadelphia, Philadelphia cream cheese.
Interesting. So global influences were starting to make their way into Mama's kitchen, even back then. Speaks to her willingness to embrace new flavors, new ingredients, new possibilities.
Exactly. It shows that even the most traditional recipes can evolve and adapt over time, incorporating new influences while staying true to those roots. But what I find most fascinating about this cheesecake recipe, about all of Mama's recipes, really are those handwritten notes, the ones that give us that glimpse into her thought process.
They're like little love letters from Mama, aren't they? Sharing her tips, her tricks, her years of experience, all scribbled in those faded blue lines.
Precisely. Like her note on the sopa de puerros con arroz, where she suggests adding 25 grams, more or less, of rice. That more or less speaks volumes about her approach to cooking, don't you think?
It really does. It's a reminder that cooking isn't always about precision, it's about intuition, about feeling your way through a recipe, trusting your senses, adjusting as needed.
It's about having the confidence to make a dish your own, to add your personal touch, to trust your instincts. And that's a powerful message, especially for those of us who might be a little intimidated by the idea of cooking from scratch.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the joy of experimentation, the creativity of adapting recipes to your liking, the satisfaction of creating something delicious from simple ingredients.
And, as we're talking about Mama's legacy, it occurs to me that these handwritten recipes are more than just instructions. They're a testament to the power of food to connect us to our past, to our families, to our cultures.
They're like culinary time capsules, preserving not just flavors and techniques, but memories, stories, traditions. They remind us that even the simplest act of cooking can be this really profound expression of love, of connection, of who we are and where we come from.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into Celeste Mamoma, I'm left with such a sense of gratitude, for the opportunity to explore this culinary treasure trove. It's been a journey not just of flavors and techniques, but of family, tradition, and that enduring power of food to connect us to our past.
It really has. And, I think that's the beauty of a collection like this. It's not just about the recipes themselves, it's about the stories they tell, the connections they forge, and the way they transport us to Mama's kitchen, even after all these years.